Welcome to Willing Warrior, episode number 44. I'm calling it the Spirit of the Age, Manosphere. To help me with this, I've got my son, Zach. This is a particular issue that's, I would say, has troubled his generation, so I thought it'd be good to have him. When we first talk about Manosphere, or the Spirit of the Age, I want to remind you of what it says about the sons of Issachar. If you go to 1 Chronicles 12, you'll see that these were men who were skilled in understanding the Spirit of the Age and knew what to do about it. And so we need men like that again. So I'm going to make some hypotheses, some bold statements. Effeminacy, or weak men, have ruled the church for a very long time. And what's proof of that? What's proof of that is we've exchanged the war songs, Psalms of David, for what I call Jesus love songs, or Jesus is my boyfriend songs. Started first with what I would call soft hymnody. Some of you might be familiar with the tunes or the songs about a church on a hill and standing in the garden alone with Jesus. And so these were Jesus, my boyfriend songs. Now they've gotten even softer, I would say, and even more readily digestible as they've gone to various courses. So to prove this out, there are many men who wonder, when I become a Christian, do I lose my masculinity? Does grace turn my testosterone into estrogen? And they're confused. And you can see this confusion. You have 60% of the churchgoers are women, 40% are men, and many times they're dragged along. Little boys are who's running most of the ministries. It's women from Sunday school to youth groups are heavily involved there. And then we have men who are teaching from the pulpit, not like prior generations. So probably the most famous sermon in prior generations was from Jonathan Edwards. It was called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Man, that one would really garner some press nowadays. Instead, we've replaced sermons like that would thunder, speaking like a prophet of old, right, with very forceful words, for more affirming, more therapeutic, more softer, more nuanced sermons. And so here we have that femininity has become the height of godliness. And these young men wonder, what do I do? And so masculinity has become toxic. And now these young men with masculinity have lost many of their role models, and there's been a lot of other things that have pushed them. We have the world's not a void. God, the masculinity, if we deny masculinity, it's like trying to deny gravity. And so we have this whole thing that's sprung up called the Manosphere. Would you provide a definition of the Manosphere?
Yeah, so the Manosphere basically just refers to a collection, usually of like online blogs, channels, personalities, just groups, and they mostly focus on men's issues. So this might be issues like divorce, how to attract women, just basic self-help for men on particular male-related things. And so there's a wide range of people and personalities offering a wide range of advice, but it's usually focused on men's issues.
So Zach mentioned some personalities, so in godly men who are in this arena, right? You might have heard some names like Michael Foster, Aaron Wrenn, and there's some other ones out there as well,
yeah.
Right? So maybe start with some of the other famous personalities and tell us a little bit about those. Maybe the ones we should be a little leery of, right?
Yeah, so I think some of the most famous ones are what most people know are the Tates. So Tristan and Andrew Tate. These guys really blew up. They took advantage of what I would call like a social media hack, where they went on a bunch of podcasts. They said a bunch of stuff. Some of it was more what you might say is like red-pilled, more aware of things going on in the world. But some of it was highly inflammatory, intentionally, I think, because anger is the best way to spread socially on the internet. And so they took a lot of those moments and they captured them in like little short 30-second videos, and they spread on things like TikTok and Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, sort of all the platforms. And they effectively farmed that out. And so kind of what a lot of people might know them for is some of that inflammatory content that spread through these short form platforms, because that's kind of the way that they grew, right?
Yeah, so they were personifying something. So men, there is a time to fight, and these guys were fighting. They were outspoken. They were
world famous kickboxers, actually.
Yeah. So here they are doing some of that, and be like, oh wow, that's somebody to grab a hold of, right?
Yeah, and standing up for yourself and, developing your body. And so there's some good stuff there as well. But there's also,
Maybe the dark side, touch on it just a little bit.
yeah, there's also some stuff in terms of just, like, especially when it comes to the terms of sexuality. So they're Muslims. They argue that men should have sex with lots of women. This is a good thing that you should pursue this. And they were, part of the way they originally made their money was through running an online webcam and chat service with women.
Yeah.
So selling sex, right?
Yeah.
Online.
So, in case anybody's wondering, we're not encouraging this. We're just acknowledging that they're there.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's some other guy. There's another guy. Another famous guy would say it's Jordan Peterson. So, how would you describe him or define him?
Yeah. So Jordan, if you're not aware of who Jordan Peterson is for some reason, maybe you're not online as much. Jordan Peterson really blew up in fame. I think in 2016, I think was the year. This was, I remember it in terms of the Trump-Hillary election. I think he blew up then. But he's a Canadian clinical psychologist. He was a professor who stood up against the Canadian Bill C-16, which would have compelled speech on transgender issues, so using certain pronouns. And he argued against this. He pushed up against it. And he sort of became, this was sort of a launching point for his fame. But really, I would say today, he's known much more for his sort of evolutionary psychology, Jungian archetype breakdowns, especially of things like classic literature, so things from the Bible, things like classic stories like Pinocchio. And I'd say that's really where he's in his element when he's breaking down those concepts, because he's breaking down sort of these stories sort of contain underlying truths about reality. And so he sort of digs into them and tries to analyze them. And I think he's quite intelligent when he's doing that. He's quite
So instead of trying to cancel culture, he's trying to embrace it and saying, look what we've got, this long history, right? Which much of it's been shaped by biblical foundation. So
there's deeper truths. Some of it is obviously the Bible. He pulls from examples of the Bible, but there's also things that are just, their stories so old, they contain certain truths within them.
Yeah, so one of the old stories almost every culture had was a kind of a white knight slaying the dragon or rescuing the damsel. What would that mean in today's culture when they talk about a white knight?
Well, I think the white knight metaphor has shifted a little bit, because obviously there's like the valiant knight who comes and rescues, like a St. George killing the dragon. White knight has a different term today. And so white knight would be a man who comes and rescues a woman, and he often has ulterior motives in terms of trying to get something for himself. So he's trying to display a certain level of virtue and help, right? But it's often with underlying motives. And the typical example is a man who claims for gender equality, but yet is always at the rescue of women, right? Which is kind of counterintuitive. If you're for equality,
right,
women can take care of themselves. They don't
take
need
care
your
of
help.
themselves. Got it.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're talking about in this manosphere is we're saying the culture's out of whack. So clarification, we think femininity is wonderful in a woman, right? And we also think masculinity is wonderful in a man.
Yeah.
And so the whole culture is kind of, because masculinity's been so downplayed as bad, femininity's been held up, the whole culture's slid towards femininity. So here we look at femininity and we look at the things of a mother, nurturing and beautifying and caring. Mm-hmm. How could that go? How could that ever be bad? How could you have too much of that, right?
Yeah. So the way you can have too much of that, if you're wondering, there's kind of an archetype for this. So if you think about the story of Rapunzel, Rapunzel is captured by this witch in a tower, and she uses her to sort of heal herself uses her power to heal herself. And so she has to capture her. She has to keep her confined. She has to keep her scared of the world so that she can keep pulling from her. And this is portrayed, and she portrays herself as the nurturing mother. But this is the dark side of that. And so the dark side of the nurturer is someone who holds someone back from reaching their full potential by embracing the struggle, by embracing the risks that you have to face in order to grow. Often, and this can be for maybe your motive is simply to keep that person safe. Their desire is to keep them from facing the harshness. But the darker side of that is for your own desires, your own needs, your own wants. And obviously, I don't necessarily know if any woman perfectly fits this archetype, right? That's why it's an archetype. But that desire and that pull to nurture and care and protect can go too far. And children need to be able to develop into the people that they're supposed to become. In order to do that, they have to face some struggle. They have to face some danger. They have to be able to confront it. And they have to be able to face the consequences of that.
So how, in a balanced home or balanced society, how would the father play in that, right? Nurturing, mother nurturing, caring, protecting. What would have been a typical father's role in the past?
Yeah, so most fathers, an example of that would be rough and tumble play. So typically, not that mothers can't rough and tumble play, but usually it's the father who fills this role in terms of wrestling with his kids. And it's a very natural thing for most fathers to do. Another thing would be like throwing your baby up in the air. Mothers get nervous sometimes when dads do that, depending on how they want to go.
Right.
And some mothers might scold their husbands and say, hey, don't do that with my baby. You're going to hurt them. But the reality is that the father is not the secondary parent. He's also the child's parent. And even if he doesn't understand why he does this, it's actually critical to the child's development, because the ability to understand the limbs, understand some risk, understand your mobility as a kid, understand how to play and socialize with other people, this is critical for the child's development. And so you can see kids who haven't had rough and tumble play, and they reach about the age of 2 or 3, and they're kind of doughy, and they don't know how to move their body, and they don't know how to play and interact with other people. And a big problem with that is if they hit a certain age, usually a lot of that socialization is taken up with other kids. But if they're doughy and they don't know how to play, other kids typically don't want to play with them. And so they lack that level of socialization. So in a lot of ways, they can be held back socially because they didn't get to develop their social skills. They didn't get to develop their physical abilities.
Right. So you hear out. So every generation has had so-called bullies, right? But the discussion seems to have ratcheted up 3-4 levels. That I am going to protect my kids from all bullies everywhere, anywhere, anytime. And that may not be as good as we think, right? I mean, obviously, there is a level of bullying that's too far, but there's a level of bullying that just seems to be natural, right, in the human society. These kids play together.
Yeah, I don't know if bullying is the right word, but just a level of, sort of push and pull, right?
Verbal bantering or physical, either way, right? Or
wrestling,
kids on a playground, whatever they may be, right?
Yeah.
Brush yourself off and keep going. So these young men who've grown up in bubble wrap, right?
Yeah.
With extreme nurturing and very little fathers, either absent or playing couch potato, not really involved with their life. Here they grow up, they run across other men in society that start using phrases like "man up," "put your big boy pants on." How do they respond? Where are they at?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally what you have to understand is the phrase "man up" is a shaming tactic. And I don't say that in a way to disregard shaming tactics. I know some people say you should never shame anybody. I'm not of that perspective. I think shame can be a valuable social tool. But it's a tool, and it's not always applicable in every case. And so the question you have to ask is, when should you shame somebody, and what do they really need? And so that's a shaming tactic, and what they're missing out on is the reality is a lot of these young men are already ashamed. They already understand they're not the man that they're supposed to be. They're not where they're supposed to be.
Right.
And so you shaming them isn't helpful. They're already ashamed. Like, what is more shame going to do? I think what a lot of these men need, and this is my perspective, is a lot of them need encouragement and a roadmap. And for some of these men who are especially broken, that can be pitifully low. Pitifully low. And Jordan Peterson, he has some really great examples as a clinical psychologist who's really helped some people move out of this.
Right.
Just talking about some like things you would think are super simple. Just everyone should be able to do that, right? Whether it's, make your bed in the morning.
Right.
And how much of a struggle that can be for some people to even just do the basic things to take care of themselves.
Right.
So, and it's hard because I don't think we're in a place where we want to be able to pity what we consider to be grown men and help them along. That's not a place that most of us want to go or help.
Right.
But I think that's what some men might need, depending on where they're at.
Yeah. So previous generations, there were some instinctual physical aspects of men that would drive them on to do things that were uncomfortable. For instance, Scriptures talks about their flesh burns, right? I want to find a woman. right?
Yeah.
And that often meant, that should have meant in a biblical society, I want to get married, right?
Or at least approach women in a non-biblical society at minimum.
Right, right. So today, that whole burning of flesh, instead of saying, "Hey, I want to go court a woman, win a woman's heart, and make her make her my wife." It was Shakespeare's phrase, not mine, right? But I agree with. He says, "Woo them, wed them, and bed them." Right. So I hope that doesn't get.
Hopefully in that order.
Yeah, that's right. So that whole burning of flesh is, instead of engaging with culture, instead of stepping up and doing something, how is it fulfilled today? Often.
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of ways that people can achieve similar types of things. So obviously you have the use of online pornography, and the barrier to pornography is really low now. So in the previous generations, you had to go to a special store, you had to go to a special place. They required driving, or some amount of distance between you
had
and
to
the
go
thing.
to the store that wasn't really for adults, but though they said they were, right?
Yeah, today you have something in your pocket that can access it within seconds,
Right.
and it's available all the time.
Right.
And it's the most variety, the most intensity, whatever you want, whatever you can imagine, however many forms. And so that's a new thing. And the other thing is, surprisingly, video games. And this is not to demonize the use of video games, because I think that can be a fun pastime for some people. But there's a dysregulation of them. And that what you can find is that men, I think, are very well programmed to want to accomplish things.
Yeah.
They want to strive forward and accomplish things.
Set a record.
Set a record,
Yeah.
achieve something new, break boundaries.
Right.
And typically this is done through accomplishing things at work or in your personal life. Video games can provide an easy outlet for a similar, not the same, but similar type response, where you can achieve something, but it's just in virtual reality.
Right.
Right. And so it can be addicting for a lot of young men who struggle to achieve something, or they've just become addicted to this sensation.
Right. So maybe we've talked a lot about the way the culture is today and the trouble, and it didn't get there in a generation or two. Now let's talk about how to get it out of the ditch, right? How to get the ox out of the ditch. So here we sit with feminism is highlighted, and masculinity is diminished, but yet we run across these biblical phrases, right? Wives, submit to your husbands. I do not permit a woman to teach and have authority over a man, speaking about in the pulpit, or for a woman to lead in prayer in church. And so we have all this going on. But how do most men in the church respond to those phrases, or what do we know about those? How are they received today, or what's the typical response?
Yeah, so I've had some experiences where it was in a wedding and you hear those phrases saying, and you can just feel people wince. You just feel them tighten up.
I can't believe he said that.
Yeah, they don't like it at all. And then it's the way that some people, because they know they're going to get that reaction, what they'll do is they'll put the 10,000 qualifiers. So they'll preface it. They'll really extend out. They'll preface it saying this is what it's not, this is what it means. Maybe they want to go back to the original Greek and sort of try to explain it another way. And so they have 10,000 explanations, right, on how to deal with it.
And does that essentially neuter it?
Yeah, functionally. So a good example I've heard is that men and women should practice mutual submission.
Right.
And it was a 10,000 way word of saying that men should love their wives and wives should submit to their husbands. And they wanted to say the biblical thing. They just didn't want to sound the biblical way. They wanted to rephrase it in a way that sounded very egalitarian.
Yeah. So we come up with these, instead of using the word patriarchy, which is almost forbidden or verboten today, which simply is the Latin phrase for father's rule. It talks in scripture about a man should rule his house well. We don't like that patriarchy phrase, so out it goes, and then we work in some new phrases, right? Complementarianism, equal partnership,
Yeah.
and it's your point, qualify it 10,000 ways.
Yeah, and the primary structure there is what we've elevated to the point of God is man. Man is now God, and man is judging God. And so we need to lighten God up. We need to make man consumable, God consumable to man, right? Because man is judging God. And the reality is that God is actually the judge of man, right? And so we can take confidence that the words of God are true and stand firmly in them. And not that we don't have to explain anything, or we don't need to, like you did with patriarchy, we can explain it. But we don't need to wince and move away and
apologize.
apologize. We can just stand firmly and say, no, this is what God's word says. You can agree with God or disagree, but this is where He is.
So yeah, it's like gravity, right? So it exists. This is the way God's created the world.
Mm-hmm.
Accept it. And if you don't, it's to your own peril, right? Try to jump off the roof and pretend like there is no gravity.
Yeah.
You know, good luck with that. So, so this whole concept today, many men are trying to find masculinity in a shape or form, and they're trying to find it what I would call with blogs, books, podcasts. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but how is it really caught, right? How is it? How do young men? We just can't tell man up, but how can they grow in manliness, right? Where were they? What's their models, right? Where are they going to go?
Yeah. So there has to be a cultivation of virtue. And so this is best done, I would say, through a brotherhood. So to find like-minded men who can help encourage and push you in the right direction. But this can be difficult because if you're a young man, especially in your mid to late 20s, who doesn't have anything to offer these men, they effectively have to take you in, which is a difficult thing to do because you're taking in someone who effectively doesn't add any value to the group. And you can do that for a time and you can help out. And that's a difficult thing to happen. And so what I would encourage people to do is first off, if you have children, raise your children, your young boys, to become future men. Raise them as if they're future men. And there's age appropriate things there. That's where you need to start. And so that avoids the little problem. But I think that for the men who are already of age, in a sense, who are men, there's going to have to be inroads and ministries that are going to have to exist to bring these men in and to help cultivate virtue. And some of this can be done, again, some of these online communities are attempting to recreate that. And it's not as good as the real thing. It's not as good as real people. And it's such a mixed bag in there. It's such a mixed bag between the good and the bad that not all these men are going to have the discernment to figure out what they're learning.
Yeah, so maybe let me jump in and encourage older men, which I qualify myself, right? The skills that you were taught by your dad, your grandfather, right, are still needed today.
Yeah.
Right? So be a father to these men who either didn't have a father or had an abdicating father. Make them a part of your life, right? Remember the Apostle Paul's dealing with young Timothy, and he says to Timothy, emulate me. Make them a part of your life. Put aside the thought process of let's do it organizationally. Let's go get a Sunday school class. Let's go get this and let's have a web page. There's nothing wrong with those things, but I think you really need to make them a part of your life, just like Jesus did, right? He took 12 men and discipled them for 3 years, and it was intense, but look at the dividends that it paid, right? He didn't send them to online class. He didn't send them to some...
you don't have to save 100 men. You can start with trying to work and plant seeds with one.
Right. So my experience is that men work best when they're challenged, when they take on responsibilities. The example I often use is young men or any men are like a pickup truck, right? Empty pickup truck, an old one, driving down a gravel road. If they're in the truck by themselves, it's a bumpy ride. They get married, take on some responsibility. I got to provide for my wife. Load it up a little bit. They have children.
Load up a lot more.
Load it up some more. Have some more children. It's really loaded up. And before you know it, those guys are using their energy and that truck is running smooth. Now they're working hard, but they've grown so much as they've learned to take on responsibility. So let's keep encouraging old men, young men, middle-aged men, whatever age, take on responsibility. But this whole concept of masculinity, let's not apologize for it. Find yourself in churches where the Psalms are being sung, where the word is thundering, and where godliness is not femininity. It's God taking care of us like a mother loving her child. And how could, it's like how a mother forget her baby at the breast? Neither could God forget about us, right? So there's this nurturing aspect to God, but there's also we have a battle, right? We have dominion, to go take dominion, to take possession of this earth that Christ died for. Any closing words from you?
Yeah.
Anything we missed?
Yeah, so the only thing I wanted to say was that obviously it's not it's not masculinity versus femininity. And I think you've already highlighted that to some
Right.
degree. So it's not that femininity is bad, it's that there's the integration of both. There's a beautiful coming together of the two. And what we're not saying is that obviously that femininity is bad, but that there's such a leaning to one side, and one side is maybe propped up as virtuous and one side is propped up as toxic. So they're pitted against each other. So we're not trying to pit masculinity and femininity against each other, but rather understand that these things need to come together, right?
Right.
But that there might need to be a cultivation of the masculine because it's been
Right.
pushed aside.
Right. So young men, any men, right? So you can, with Jesus, you can weep at Lazarus' tomb, knowing he's been dead, with Martha and Mary. And then you can go into the temple and you can find the money changers and you can flip their table. You can don a whip. You can take on a fight with the religious hypocrites of the day, the Pharisees. This is what our culture needs. It needs men to be men, women to be men, women to be women,
Yeah.
and embrace it. Thank you. If you like by the way, thank you very much for
Yeah.
helping us with this. If you like the content, please subscribe to the page. We've got a whole lot more videos we have in mind. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, may you be blessed.